I want to go across now, live and exclusive to Washington, D.C., where I'm joined by a special guest, arguably America's top India expert. We're joined by Ashley Tellis. He served in the National Security Council staff as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Strategic Planning in Southwest Asia. He helped bring together the India-America nuclear deal, and very few people have seen the whole arc of evolution of India-America ties from as close quarters as Ashley Tellis has. So, Mr. Tellis, for taking out time on an important day, thank you. I appreciate it.
Of course, it's a pleasure to be with you again.
I want to start by asking you, Mr. Tellis, about your key takeaways from that joint statement. There's so much talk about just the visual spectacle, but you've been through the details with a very fine-tooth comb. From your lens, what's the message Prime Minister Modi and President Trump are sending to each other's countries and to the rest of the world in the formal joint statement that was put out at the end of the visit?
So let me start by identifying what I thought was the primary objective of Prime Minister Modi's visit. It was essentially to convince President Trump that India was a great partner for the United States and that India shared in the success of his ambitions. And by doing so, I think he also wanted to gain a measure of immunity from Trump's more problematic policies, especially in the area of trade. My judgment, after watching a day and a half of interactions here in DC, is that the Prime Minister succeeded magnificently on all counts. In fact, I think it was a Modi makes magic visit because it's very hard to disarm a personality like President Trump. But just watching their interactions during the presser after the day's conversations, I think he had achieved exactly what he set out to do.
Why do you feel this way? Because the other way of looking at this, which is the perspective the Indian opposition is putting out, is that it's a bit embarrassing for Prime Minister Trump to be in DC on the day that these reciprocal tariffs announced in a press conference. In the press conference, he repeatedly picks on India, repeats that in the presence of Prime Minister Modi. Is that, from your lens, just a negotiating tactic, or are we seeing this time a less warm, a less effusive, more transactional, more business-like Donald Trump?
No, I think there are some things that are Trump's fixations which are not going to go away. Tariffs are one of those. And India is going to get tarred by those tariffs no matter what. But I think the space has now opened up for a negotiation. The commitments that India has made to buy additional US defense equipment, to create greater market access for US commodities, these are the things that, ring like music in Trump's ears. And so we've not heard the last of this. So think of this as a process that is occurring in parallel. In general, Trump is going to pursue a tariffs-heavy economic policy that is going to be aimed at the global trading system. But he will be willing to make deals individually with countries based on what he sees as their importance to US interests. And I think India is clearly now in that category. I mean, it always was, but it's wonderful to see Trump acknowledging that. And I think he was very, very clear on that point, that he sees India as a partner on a whole range of issues. And the joint statement, I think, elaborates that in great detail.
They've also spoken of the F-35 stealth fighter jet being offered to India. Now, this is prohibitively costly. There's no talk of transfer of technology in these stealth fighters. You were involved personally in the nuclear deal. Do you think this is something that India should be considering, given the geostrategic considerations? Or do you think that we'd much rather be better off with a country like France or a more reliable defense partner? And why I say this is because there was so much fanfare around the GE 404 engines being offered to India during President Biden's visit. Ultimately, we still are waiting for those engines. So how reliable is America as a defense supplier to India? We've got a history of insecurity with American supplies. The recent experience isn't very heartening either.
Well, I think the offer to supply F-35s eventually, and I emphasize the word eventually because President Trump went out of his way to say this is a pathway to the eventual offering of an F-35. I think that is a symbol of Mr. Trump's willingness to put things on the table that previously were off the table. But whether it is the answer to India's challenges where it comes to its air power deficits, I think requires more examination. There are some things that I think one can be confident about. I think it would be very hard to agree to co-producing F-35s in India. I mean, the technology is something that the United States guards very zealously. We've done co-production agreements with only a very few US allies, and those agreements were done at the beginning of the program. As you point out, the aircraft is expensive. There will be all kinds of security and monitoring issues involved if there is actually a sale of the aircraft, monitoring that India may not feel particularly comfortable with. So I think, there are issues that still have to be resolved if India decides to go in that direction. There's also the larger question, and I think you were hinting about that in your question. And that larger question is, can India integrate the F-35 in its Air Force, given that it has already now gone down the path of acquiring Rafales for its medium combat aircraft role? Where would the F-35 fit into the Indian Air Force's force structure? These are all issues that I think we will have an opportunity to discuss in times to come. But I see the F-35 offer as a symbol that is intended to convey to India that the US will not be unwilling to offer it the best defense technology possible.
Interesting. Let's now talk about the trade deal that clearly talks have to begin very soon. There's a window till the 2nd of April, after which the tariffs could come into play. Do you think there's enough time, given the fact that the Commerce Secretary hasn't yet been ratified? That's still a work in progress. There was talk and negotiation on a limited trade deal, which ran into trouble the last time. India has very serious concerns about the import of agricultural products, dairy products, which are big asks from the United States. If Robert Lighthizer and Piyush Goyal couldn't resolve it the last time round, how do you view the probability of being able to get a trade deal going, a bilateral trade agreement going in this month and a half between now and the 2nd of April?
I think it is going to be tough. There's no question about it. And it's not only the issues at commerce, it's also USTR, which I presume, the US Trade Representative's Office, which I presume will take the lead in these negotiations. So getting a deal that has involved very, very sticky challenges in the past, by the time April rolls around, I think may be hard. But the important thing is this, to my mind. The negotiation should begin in earnest, and there should be clear evidence that both sides are negotiating in good faith. And if we can at least put those building blocks on the table before April, then I think there may be ways in which India can be afforded some waivers before the universal tariff regime comes into play.
President Trump indicated that apart from Tahavur Rana, he'd be willing to consider, and we have a list of at least 12 most wanted people who are in the United States. Do you see there being a marked difference in the tolerance seen in the Biden administration to anti-India operatives who are residing happily on US soil and the way the Trump government views it? Or do you see there not being much of a difference?
I think Trump clearly wants to be as cooperative as possible with India, but the structural challenges are still going to remain, right? If these individuals are US citizens, then it gets extremely complicated because the executive branch simply cannot, extradite individuals without the courts having a say in the matter and so on and so forth. If these are non-US citizens, then I think it's a different story. So I think that issue will have to be examined on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, let's also speak of the personal bonhomie and the fact that President Trump invited Prime Minister Modi so early on in his term. So we've seen the Prime Minister of Israel, we've seen the Prime Minister of Japan, we've seen the King of Jordan amongst those who've come. How much, because there's a big debate in India about whether it's the right thing to go so early in your visit, because one perspective is he barely got any time with the American president. He went there last evening. President Trump kind of kept him hanging till the afternoon, met him only at 3 o'clock. There was no state dinner. It didn't have the pomp and show of the last visit. The other, which is the Jaishankar point, is to get in there early. Get in there early, make your point, get some mind space. Which of the two do you think in the end turned out to be the right strategy?
Well, I think Minister Jaishankar's calculation was spot on. Given the mercurial quality of President Trump's administration and the behaviors that have been adopted so far, I think it served India's interests better to be in the queue early, to be helping to define what the contours of the engagement would be, not only immediately, but over the long term. And I think it really helped, this visit really helped to get Trump to focus on India's value for US interests. And I think he mentioned that a couple of times in the presser. So I am tempted to conclude that this was actually the smart thing to do. There will always be opportunities for future engagements, right? The president has committed to visiting India for the Quad Leaders Summit sometime later this year. There will be an intense round of bilateral agreements on discussions on trade, on defense, and so on and so forth. But the point is to get leader level attention very early on, I think is always a smart play. And I'm glad that India made it.
Ashley, Tellis for taking out time and joining us. Thank you. I'm going now to arguably again one of the top experts on India-America ties, Lisa Curtis. She was part of the first Trump administration, now a senior fellow and director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. You can't get better than Lisa Curtis and Ashley Tellis speaking one after another. Two very rich insights there. Thank you very much, Ms. Curtis, for joining us. I want your key takeaways for an Indian audience from this first bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the re-elected President Trump.
Well, I think it was a successful meeting. The fact that it happened so early in the Trump administration is very notable. It shows the emphasis and importance of India to the United States. And you could really see from the press spray, from the press conference, that there is a warm friendship between the two leaders that very much came across, their mutual respect for one another. And then if you look at the very lengthy joint statement and all of the wide-ranging agreements that were made, I think it's very clear that the U.S.-India relationship is off to a very good start under this second Trump administration. There was an emphasis on military cooperation. They talked about the co-production of Javelin missiles and Stryker combat vehicles. They talked, the U.S. even opened the door for India to potentially buy the F-35 aircraft, very high-end technology, something that India would very much be interested in. So I think, between everything that was discussed and the kind of warmth and respect that the two leaders showed for one another, I think we can, safely say that the relationship is off to a good start.
There's a lot of chatter in India about the timing of that Trump press conference on tariffs, given the fact that you have a visiting head of state. Just hours before you meet him, you do a press conference where, apart from threatening reciprocal tariffs against all countries in particular, he repeatedly mentioned India in that press conference, calling it tariff abuser. That doesn't really set the stage. I mean, in terms of optics, those aren't ideal optics, Lisa Curtis. It's almost as if he's using tariffs as a negotiating, bargaining tactic to put the visiting dignitary down. Or at least that's the effort.
Well, this is the way that Trump operates. He operated in the same fashion in the first Trump administration. 24 to 48 hours before he would have a meeting with Prime Minister Modi, he would tweet out something about India's high tariffs. And I think this is a bit of a negotiating tactic that he likes to use. He likes to get out there with a very tough message, and threaten to retaliate or reciprocate, however you want to put it. So I don't think that is surprising. But you could also argue that he got that issue out of the way. He sort of, made his point before the meeting. And so then, you could have a more positive engagement interaction. He's already stated his case. He wants to see India reduce tariffs, and they have agreed to a trade negotiation. The question is, will the two sides be able to come to a trade deal?
So let's spend some time talking about it, given that Robert Lighthizer, Piyush Goyal were discussing, negotiating a limited trade agreement, and that came to naught in the first term. Now we have effectively a month and a half till the 2nd of April to be able to come to an agreement on a bilateral trade agreement. Given the differences in approach on issues like agricultural products, dairy products, and so many others, is there enough room, bandwidth, time, mind space to be able to get a trade deal done in this limited window?
Yeah, I think it's extremely ambitious. I would be very surprised if they could make a trade agreement within, the next several weeks. They couldn't do it in 4 years during the first Trump administration. I think, there's things India can do that will help narrow the trade deficit with the United States. Things like, importing more military equipment and importing more oil and gas. This will help, but it certainly, is not going to satisfy Trump. I think he really is looking for India to reduce tariffs on items that the U.S. exports to India, medical devices, agriculture items, and other things. So I think, really the pressure is on Prime Minister Modi and what he can do in terms of delivering some of these, reductions
No,
in
but some of
tariffs.
this is undeliverable if it were. For example, we've got the gap on dairy products, agricultural products on our screen right now. There is a big political constituency that Prime Minister Modi needs to deal with back home. There are millions of small dairy farmers in states like Gujarat, Maharashtra, elsewhere, who will be up in arms if India gets flooded with cheap dairy products or cheap American agricultural produce. It will be great for President Trump in his desire to make America great, but Prime Minister spoke about Indian national interests and the need to put them first from his lens.
Yeah, well, I think, we're going to see, again, I think the things that make President Trump and Prime Minister Modi respect each other, they have the same kind of leadership styles. They're really looking out for their own people, their own country. And, that's going to bump up against the idea of coming to some kind of fair trade agreement. So I think, we're going to see how much the trade issue impacts the overall strategic relationship, because frankly, there's a lot at stake when it comes to the U.S.-India overall relationship. And
you spoke of India importing more defense systems from the United States. I mean, the last big one was the GE 404 engines for the Indian light combat aircraft. That's still stuck up. I mean, so how can India trust America as a reliable weapon supplier, given our past history during the wars and now even recently, so much hype and hoopla around the announcement and then delayed delivery followed?
Yeah, I think the U.S. can make the same case. I was in the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, where we made the decision to allow India to have access to armed drone technology, the first non-NATO country to get such access. But it literally took 7 years to negotiate to complete the deal for the MQ-9s. So I think the U.S. can make the same argument that there's a lot of bureaucracy within the Indian system. It takes a long time to complete these major defense deals. So I think, each side has issues that make it difficult to...
No, but the counter to that is India doesn't really get preferential commercial rates. It's not as if there's a deep discount for a key ally, as would be the case with some other countries in terms of the pricing of those products. And for example, with the F-35, there's unlikely to be a transfer of technology or joint production, which again means you're spending all of that to buy off the shelf with no prospects of transfer of technology, and that would be difficult because, for example, India operates the S-400 missile defense systems, and that's something America would be uncomfortable with. So basically, unlike, say, the Rafale, where there is an element of joint production and production in India, technology transfer with a very expensive fighter jet like the F-35, that would be inconceivable, at least at this moment.
Yeah, well, of course, India is not an ally of the United States, but we still, would like to see more defense cooperation, more, co-production is also on the table for, like I said, the Javelin missiles, the Stryker combat vehicles, all of that's on the table, and it's going to be hard work. The U.S. will have to look at its technology transfer concerns. It will be looking at, how much has the Russians been able to penetrate the Indian military establishment. What does that mean for the safety of, U.S. technology that may be entering India? So there are so many questions and things that need to be worked out. And, I'm glad we're talking about these because on the one hand, it was a very positive engagement, very, set the stage for the next 4 years. An ambitious agenda, to be sure, but now we're talking about some of the realities of what needs to get accomplished and some of the obstacles that they're going to face in carrying these programs forward.
So they've spoken of India hosting the Quad Summit. If that happens at the head of state level, that will mean President Trump would be in India arguably sometime before fall, around fall. What do you see happen between now, February and fall?
Well, yeah, I think a lot does have to happen. But first, let me point out that if Trump does indeed go to India this fall, that will be the first time that a U.S. president has, made the trek to India in his first year. So that's quite significant in and of itself. But it also means that the two sides need to work hard. They need to, prepare for a Quad summit. That takes a lot of work. Figuring out what will be the deliverables, what will be, Trump's stamp on the Quad. Of course, it was President Trump that revived the Quad back in 2017. But now, what kind of new initiatives are they going to be working on, the four countries together? That's one thing. The second is, like we said, how are they going to push forward on these defense sales issues? What needs to happen here in the United States? How can India sort of prod its own defense bureaucracy on these issues? And third, on the trade issue, that's probably the most difficult. Our trade negotiator has not been confirmed. Jameson Greer, I think he will be confirmed. But this, is something that, he has to get into place. They have to start these trade negotiations. So I think we're going to see a lot of back and forth between U.S. and Indian officials before this visit by Trump in the fall, which is only, a few months away.
Well, there's a lot that needs to get done, if at all it can get done, between a government that is extremely transactional in the United States and one in India which is determined to protect its national interests. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Lisa Curtis, for taking out time and joining us on an important day. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.